Welcome back. Dabo is back. The Weasel lives. Clemson made the playoff. Doug Maurice here for KOTN Late Night with you guys. Bill Landis is over across the street at Lucas Oil Stadium. I was there earlier. I left in the third quarter to get back to my hotel room so we could do this live show and talk about everything that is happening in college football. This is what we want, right? Who is left that wants a 4-team playoff instead of a 12-team playoff? We got an overtime game today. We got a game decided by a last-second field goal. We got a blowout in a championship game where a team made a statement, and we got a banger in the Big Ten, and we are going to run through them all. Landis is going to join us as soon as possible once he gets set up in Indianapolis at the game. But what probably just happened from our perspective, because guess what? We're in the North. We care about the North. I think we just said goodbye to Bama. Did we just say goodbye to Bama? You guys are going to be my co-hosts in the chat until Landis joins. I admit, as we've been talking about this during the course of the day, the idea of getting Bama up north was quite appealing to us, to me. And I fell in love with brands, and I know that you should earn your spot. You should deserve your spot. But, man, who didn't want to see Alabama in Happy Valley or Alabama in South Bend? Or I don't think it would have happened, but Alabama and Columbus. I don't think that's how it would have happened. But if that's going to be SMU instead because SMU earned it, so be it. But we are going to be in a situation here where we are looking at potentially Arizona State coming up. Now, this is the other thing, too. Clemson's probably the 11 and 12 now, or Clemson and SMU, the 11 and the 12, and that Boise State and Arizona State are going to get 2 byes. We're going to talk about projections here. I'm not going to pretend that I know exactly what's going to happen, but we're going to talk about the Big Ten game. We're going to talk about the Big 12 game. Iowa State got blitzed a little bit, and I think to me what happened to Iowa State is similar to what happened to Kansas State at BYU this year, what happened to Pitt at SMU this year. Something happens and everything goes against you, and all of a sudden it's over. And so that was a momentum swing for Iowa State. We'll get into that more, but it's an unfortunate ending for Iowa State. It would have been great to have another Northern team in it, but as it stands, we're going to have 6 Northern teams in the playoff, and we're going to have 6 teams not from the North. We're going to have Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Indiana, Notre Dame, and Boise State. And we're going to celebrate that. The thing that I wanted for this playoff, and I think that those of us, the loyal, dedicated, educated fans that have joined us here on Kings of the North, on KOTN Late Night all year, is we want great Northern representation. We want great Northern teams to have their shot, but man, did we want some North-South matchups. And I'm a little curious how all of that is going to shake down. So do you want to I want Landis to be part of it. Maybe I'll run it. Like, this is not mine. Landis and I were sitting next to each other at Lucas Oil Stadium the whole game and talking about this. Let's run through what we think. Shane, I think, is on it here. I think this is probably right. So Oregon is going to be the 1 seed as the only undefeated team in the country in the Big Ten champ. Congratulations to the Ducks. Off the top, here are my feelings about this. Oregon is clearly the best team in the country, and Ohio State, Penn State, and Boise State at various times this year really hung with Oregon, and I think the South should be afraid of that. And so that idea, this takes nothing away. This takes nothing away of how good Oregon is. But we've seen Northern teams able to hang with that under the intense pressure of what Oregon does to you when they are on offensively. It feels like you're getting sucked down in quicksand trying to keep up with them. And I thought Penn State managing to keep up with Oregon for much of that game and to not get put away in the first half when it felt like they could have gotten put away. I thought what we saw in the Big Ten championship game was Bill. I thought the 2 things that Bill and I talked about in previewing this game on Thursday. One, it wasn't the first thing we talked about, but the second thing we talked about was the idea that what if Oregon just shows up and is like, hey, we haven't played our best game yet. And when we do, and when we are healthy, we are the best team in the country. Like, too late. Sorry. Look out for that. I thought Oregon did that. But we also said we wanted to see creative, aggressive Penn State take your shot, use this as a little bit of a test run for the playoff, go down swinging. And I thought we got that too. Even the idea that Penn State in the end, what's the last thing that knocked them out? Throwing a deep shot down the sideline on 2nd and 1. Is it the best decision right there? Now they're picking on Oregon's second corner, Nico Reed. They're trying to get it to Trey Wallace, who is their best receiver. I don't. My mic is a little loose. I'm sorry for that. I don't know that I would have done that, but they tried to go to their best receiver against the weaker Oregon corner, and I got it, and Nico Reed made a great interception. But they went down swinging. So I think we got Oregon asserting its dominance, and I thought we got Penn State in the fight. So, like, this is we cannot have any doubt about what Oregon is right now. This is healthy Oregon. And we had said, what did people, I don't know that people forgot, but Tez Johnson is so good. Tez Johnson is so good. And they didn't have him for a month. And is the sound horrible? Hold on a second. Let me check something for you guys. See, this is why I'm in here with you. Hold on. Is that better? Now it's coming through about that. It's a hotel setup. It's a hotel setup. You guys are hanging with us. You guys hear me better now? We got in the chat. You hear me better now? Everybody feels better? I think everybody feels, now we feel better. Okay. I thought that this is both the assertion. Thank you, everybody. And I'm sorry about that. I thought this was the assertion of Oregon and the aggressive attempt of Penn State. And I think from a Northern perspective, from a Big Ten perspective, that's what you wanted tonight. And I thought to get both of those things, I think you can say that's the best team in the country. And I think there are a lot of teams that would have been put away by Oregon tonight. And I thought there are some similarities between what Arizona State did to Iowa State and what Oregon did to Penn State or tried to do. And it's no coincidence because Kenny Dillingham used to be the offensive coordinator at Oregon, but you have to keep up with them. And if you cannot keep up with them, you're getting sucked down in the quicksand. And Iowa State couldn't. And Iowa State had 3 straight turnovers to start the second half, and they were dead, and they got blown off the field. But it felt like Penn State was at that moment, right? Like they miss a field goal, right? Or you end up punting, and it's like, okay, when you miss that opportunity, are you going to get sucked down in the quicksand? And they didn't. They grabbed the branch, right? They pulled themselves out of the quicksand. So I thought this was a really good night. I know there's some debate in the chat, and we understand this. It's just an analytical move to go for 2 when you're down 14 and you try the 2-point conversion, because the idea is if you're about 50, and you guys know this, the people who know it. It's like, I understand if it drives people crazy, but if you're down 14, if you're about 50% on 2-point conversions, you figure we'll get one of the 2. But if you make the 2-point conversion the first time, then you kick the extra point for the second touchdown and you win. You don't go to overtime. If you miss it, you can still get the 2-point conversion the second time, and you're still tied. You're the same as you are as if you kick 2 extra points. So if you didn't like that call, it's a very common thing. We've seen it a million times, but it is a little bit on the aggressive analytics edge. So don't we want that? Don't we want that from James Franklin? Don't we want Penn State going down swinging? So let's do this. All right. We got people in the chat sending their breakdowns of the top 12. We've got Oregon as the 1. We've got Georgia as the 2. Boise was ahead of Arizona State coming into today. And would you say that Arizona State's win over a ranked team in Iowa State is better than Boise State's win over UNLV that would jump Arizona State over Boise State? I would say probably not. But we understand that reasonable people can disagree here. Boise is the 3. Arizona State is the 4, and those are your 4 top seeds, right? Those are your 4 teams getting the bye. I think undisputedly, for sure, Texas is the 5. Now, and I think the idea that Clemson is the 12 as the 5th conference champion, and they just beat SMU, but you think SMU is going to get in. Clemson's the 11, SMU's the 12, I think is probably right. And then Indiana's the 10. and Tennessee's the 9. So working from the bottom up, I think the only things that are up in the air right now are Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State. So Penn State was obviously ranked higher, but they lost. Notre Dame, so would Penn State stay above Notre Dame? I think they reasonably could, maybe, because now you're looking at Penn State. They have 2 losses, but they're 2 very good losses to other playoff teams. Notre Dame has the bad loss, but then Notre Dame also has the Texas A&M win, which is better probably than any Penn State win. I think there's something there. The real decision is about Ohio State and Penn State. And so how do you view a conference championship loss? And then how do you view the head-to-head? That's where it gets complicated. When you're talking about somebody having a head-to-head win, I don't think it's quite as simple as Penn State made the conference championship game. You're not going to penalize them for that. And that's it. They're definitely getting ahead of Ohio State, because I think if you count that as kind of half a loss, so Penn State has 1.5 losses, Ohio State has 2 losses, but Ohio State has the head-to-head. I don't know that it's for sure definitive. So, and I think we can disagree. I don't think, Shrug is saying Texas should fall. They have no big win on it. They don't have any big wins, but they don't, now that it's Penn State, right? What's Penn State's best win compared to Texas's best win? And the bottom line is they both made conference championship games and played close games, but Texas was ahead of Penn State previously. So we know previously, based on what wins those teams had, we know that the committee had Texas ahead of Penn State. So that's why I think that's going to happen, right? So we can disagree. I don't think anyone's claiming that Texas has any great wins, but they've lost to the same team twice. So I just wouldn't hold your breath that Penn State's going to be ahead of Texas, even if you think maybe it should be. The thing that is the most important thing is that I just don't want Indiana and Ohio State to play again, because I think that wouldn't be very interesting. So as you're talking about, and we'll leave it at this until Landis comes back, right? You're talking about Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State as the 6, 7, 8. You're thinking about, if you can make a reasonable justification either way, I think we can massage the bracket to get some good matchups in there. So as it would stand right now, if we have SMU as the 12 and Texas as the 5, that's actually a banger in Texas. We don't give 2 squirts about that, but let Texas have a good time. Landis is at Lucas Oil Stadium. He stayed for the end of the game. He is trying to find a spot to be able to join us. I came back to the hotel so that we could do this, if you're wondering where Landis is. Texas and SMU as a 5-12 would be that game. Now, how do we want the rest of this to play out? If Notre Dame is the 6, you're looking at Clemson as the 11. Clemson and South Bend, I'd take that. If Ohio State's the 7 ahead of Penn State, you're looking at Ohio State, Indiana. We've got to get away from that. And then you're looking at Penn State, Tennessee. So I think we are happy to send Tennessee and Clemson to the north against anybody. So if the idea is that Tennessee and Clemson are going to play on the road at Notre Dame, Penn State, or Ohio State, that's a win for everybody. And then the thing is, let's just make sure Indiana doesn't play Ohio State. So if Indiana's the 10, which I think they definitely are, that just means let's not make Ohio State the 7. So whether you want to make Ohio State the 6 because they're ahead of, see, that's the thing is, I don't think you can make Ohio State the 6 because they were behind Notre Dame already. So why would you jump Ohio State over Notre Dame? You can't. So then you have to make Ohio State the 8. You can't let them be the 7 to play Indiana, and you can't make them the 6. So now we're back to Penn State still ahead of Ohio State, which I think is reasonable. So I think you could make a case either way for Penn State or Ohio State. I don't mean to talk in circles, but I don't think it's definitive. Head-to-head is one thing. One team made the conference championship game is the other thing. That's a split. So then I don't know. I think either makes sense. Let's make Penn State the 7. I'm not in love with this. Indiana at Penn State. It's not as exciting as getting a Southern team there, but at least they haven't played. So then we'd have Clemson going to Notre Dame, Tennessee going to Ohio State, Indiana going to Penn State, SMU going to Texas. Can we all live with that? SMU is not guaranteed, Dustin, to get in. SMU is not guaranteed. But now we are back to the discussion that everybody's been having of, is it Bama or SMU? And Clemson was up 24-7 in that game, and then went fumble, punt, touchdown, punt to let SMU back in all the way to tie it before they got a return and then the field goal at the end. So SMU's not definitely in, but now we're just talking about a Bama versus SMU discussion, and that's not our discussion. So Andrew is asking, why not swap Penn State and Texas? Like, you could, but Texas was ahead of Penn State before, and they both lost in conference championship games in close games. And I'm not sure, and neither has a huge glowing win. So I'm not sure what the rationale would be for having Penn State ahead of Texas, unless we're just massaging. And but they can't admit to massaging. It's one of those things. Nobody admits to massages, right? It's the thing you don't admit to, but we just want good games. Because but the other part of this is that when you start extrapolating this a little bit, if you are in the 7-10 or the 8-9, now you're looking at Oregon and Georgia in the second round. But if you're in the 6-11 or the 5-12, you're looking at Boise State or Arizona State in the second round. So this is part of it too. The other thing that would be great, if you got Ohio State, hard thing is you'd like to, the 7, whether the 7 is Notre Dame, Penn State, or Ohio State, they're going to be lined up across Georgia if they win. So it's like, who gets Georgia in that second round? That's like a big deal versus who would get Oregon, which again is an incredibly difficult game, but we've seen some of these games already. So anyway, is this interesting? Do you think that I think it is interesting? I'm just going to tell you there's an answer, but here's an answer. Can I tell you what I do have an answer to? JD Pickle. Hey, JD Pickle. I don't really know who JD Pickle is, but after the Georgia-Texas game, he tweeted, "Feel like I just watched the national championship," which means, JD Pickle, you are our next guest on Honk, Troll, or Moron, or all of the above. I have no idea what he is talking about, because this, and I think nobody else said it, which means, is he a troll? If you watch Georgia, Texas, here's the two things I think, like, if we're really going to evaluate when these I'm reading some of the comments. Hazard's talking about scheduling the Big Ten. It's hard. You are going to, like, Kirby Smart was yelling at the SEC commissioner, Greg Sankey, on the podium in the post game while Greg Sankey was standing there, because he was so mad about the schedule Georgia got. So there's going to be a constant dance with all of this between making schedules equitable by guessing who you think is going to be good, and we can all make guesses about who we think is going to be good, versus wanting the best teams to play each other for TV matchups. So a situation where, Ohio State played Michigan and Oregon and Indiana, and also played Penn State. Like, you didn't know Indiana was going to be good, but like Penn State didn't play Oregon in the regular season. Like, this is just the world we're going to live in with divisions, that sometimes it's going to be even and sometimes it's not. But like, for instance, they already announced, and we knew this because you know the opponents, Oregon's playing at Penn State on September 27th next year. They already announced it. But Ohio State and Oregon, I don't think, do play next year. So we have to live with uneven schedules. And then you still, at least for making conference championship games, have to go by record, but then you have to take it into consideration in one way or another when you're making picks for the playoff. But the only way, I mean, we'd have to go back to divisions and, like, okay, everybody plays everybody in their division, and then you cross over a little bit. That's the best way to make it equitable. When you have 18 teams in a league, there's no way to make it totally fair. So I don't know what the right answer is, except us having to live with it. Like, we have to live with it. Or, so here's the thing. The playoff bracket really matters. The other thing I think that really matters from this weekend, before I get to my point about what I think you need to win the national championship this year, we had to figure out if these games were worth it. Our conference championship games, is there a place for them, right? And I made sure I went out and walked through the stands at Oregon-Penn State tonight during the second quarter. And before the game, I thought there was a decent vibe outside the stadium. And then I had people say, hey, I've been here when Michigan's been in the Big Ten championship game. I've been here when Ohio State's been in the Big Ten championship game. It was much more packed outside. That probably is true. Penn State's a 7.5-hour drive. Oregon's 2,300 miles away. When you have one of the teams on the other side of the country, which again is the new reality, you have to be aware of this stuff. But the point was, walking around inside, it felt cool. It felt like a worthwhile game. It did not feel empty. Clemson is trash, but they're in. I don't know what to tell you. And that's the other thing about this is, now I'm going off on all different points. I love interacting with the chat, but I have to kind of stay on track. Clemson is trash. No disagreement. It was worth it. The game was worth it. And the atmosphere was worth it. And walking around in the stands, there's like an important third down play, and all the Penn State fans are standing up. And when Oregon scores, the Oregon fans are going crazy. It wasn't totally full, but it was a really good atmosphere and a worthwhile game. And when you get a game that good, that like didn't matter, right? They're both in. Now, of course, a bye matters, but nobody's playing for their life. So we really going to very possibly wind up in a spot where 3 championship game losers are in the playoff if SMU gets in. So the only team that got knocked out was Iowa State, and that was the worst game. But these other 3 games where the loser's going to get in anyway, they were great games. And nothing that happened in those games felt like, oh, well, a team's not trying that hard. They're holding something back. They're resting guys. The fans don't care. Everybody still really cared. So I think maybe with some attendance stuff, it was like, I don't know, is this worth it? But I think it was worth it. So I certainly would buy a case for like, why are we doing this? Why are we sort of adding an extra round to the playoff? But man, they got Dabo running on the field. He's all happy. Look how happy he is. Look how happy Dabo is. Dabo's so happy. Don't you want Dabo to be... I want smiling Dabo then to come north and have like icicles dripping off his eyebrows. Let's recap. This is what I think. I am not pounding my fist. I don't know that there's a point to a man in a hotel room pounding his fists about a bracket that's going to be released in 12 hours when I think there are reasonable arguments either way. I actually think a lot of people are like, oh, SMU, if SMU loses, it's like a meltdown scenario. It's like, no, it's not. It's really not. The ACC is really a one-bid league, and if they don't get their second team in, like I don't know what to tell you. Like SMU didn't play the world's greatest schedule, and they had a chance to win their game and get in, and they let Clemson kick a 51-yard field goal. And Bama lost 3 times. So there's nobody in the SEC that like you lost 3 times. There's no, I can't believe this. This is unfair to me. So there's no nightmare scenario. There's none. You can pretend. People are going to shout tomorrow. We shouted when we were picking 2 teams. We shouted about number 3. When we were picking 4, we shouted about number 5. Now we're shouting about number 11. We're never going to stop shouting about it, but nobody can whine too hard because everybody who's left out had a chance to get in. They did. SMU could have won tonight. Alabama, if they would have won one of those other games along the way, if they were 10-2 instead of 9-3, they'd be in, no doubt about it. Same for Ole Miss and South Carolina. Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Alabama. If any of them were 10-2, there'd be no discussion. So it's your fault. I blame you. So there's not that much to shout about. So we'll just do our best. Here's what I think it probably is. Oregon's the 1, that's for sure. Georgia's the 2, that's for sure. The other 3 champs that are in contention for the bye are Boise State, Arizona State, and Clemson. I think people believe that Boise State and Arizona State are going to get those byes. Boise State has been ahead of Arizona State, so we'll keep them there. Boise State's the 3, Arizona State's the 4. Those are the 4 byes. Texas was number 2 last week and went to overtime against a playoff team. They've lost twice to the same team that is going to be the 2 seed. They don't necessarily have great wins otherwise, but they don't have any crazy losses. Since they were the 2, I think they're the 5. Tennessee is almost certainly the 9. I think Indiana is almost certainly the 10. I think Clemson is almost certainly the 11, and SMU or Bama is the 12, probably SMU. And that means Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State are probably the 6, 7, 8. There are a lot. And for the people who are wondering about Penn State and Texas are very, very, very similar. But Texas was ahead before. So that's why I'm saying Texas is the 5. That's all. And at this point, to say like this is what I think, it's like, who cares what I think? What's going to happen in 11 hours and 30 minutes, right? So I think Texas will be the 5. And now we're in 6, 7, 8 for Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State. You can very much make a compelling case for that Ohio State was the 8 coming into this week and should stay the 8. And now you're just deciding how far Penn State should fall. should they fall behind Notre Dame or not? Notre Dame has a loss to Northern Illinois, but they have a win over Texas A&M that's probably better than any Penn State win. Penn State has lost to 2 playoff teams, number 1 Oregon in a conference championship game, which you earn the right to have that loss. I don't think it should be counted against you as a full loss. And you lost a 1-possession game to Ohio State. I think you could argue Notre Dame, Penn State, 6-7. I think it could go either way. But then the wrinkle is Ohio State has the head-to-head win over Penn State, and now they both have 2 losses. So if you want to say, well, they both have 2 losses and Ohio State has head-to-head over Penn State, I think that's also possible. I'm not sure it's what I would do. I think it is what Landis would do. I'm not sure. But I think the bottom line is that we're getting 3 home games, 6, 7, 8 out of Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State. We just have to figure what their seed's going to be and in what order. So that's all. Like, that's not all. Like, that's everything. That's everything. So it's, I think the real conversation tomorrow is that 6, 7, 8 conversation for our 3 Northern teams, and then SMU Bama at 12. And people are going to shout about that. I'm just not going to shout about that as much because we have people in here, RK saying Bama is out and Johnny saying Bama is definitely in. It's just a group of people analyzing data. And I think here's the thing in the end. Here's the one point I will make. Bama is not taking SMU's spot. Clemson took SMU's spot. And if you want to say, because here's the thing. If you want to say, well, if you were in before, why would you play in a conference championship game? If the conference championship game didn't exist, SMU would have gotten in. Okay, I agree. But Clemson then wouldn't have gotten in. So the ACC made this decision. This is how we're determining our champion. And we're determining our champion in a way that maybe the team that's been the better team all year has a chance to lose to a team who has been worse than them all year. But there's 2 spots in the championship game. If Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, had walked on the field at halftime and said, this game is void, SMU, I am declaring them the ACC champ, they would have been in. They would have called the committee and said, yo, committee, SMU is our champ. And the committee would have said, the ACC champ is guaranteed a spot. And that would have been it. So tomorrow, if Bama gets in ahead of SMU, Bama is not taking your spot. Clemson took your spot. You're a 1-bid league. That's real. And I know that the committee says we don't look at conferences. We just look at teams. But we can't pretend that conferences don't matter. And does the ACC seem like a 2-bid league to you with what they did this year? And if Miami hadn't lost to Syracuse last week, Syracuse wouldn't have even been in the conference championship game. And then maybe Miami could have gone and beaten SMU. I'm just saying. So, I'm not going to be outraged for SMU. If SMU doesn't get in, I'm not going to cry any tears. I'm actually kind of arguing for Bama, but I'm certainly not going to cry any tears for 9-3 Bama. So, was the SEC championship game the Cram-Off Bowl? It was the Cram-Off Bowl. And again, I think, when you look at the way Oregon and Penn State played, and J.D. Pickle saying that's the national championship game, Texas, Georgia, bro, I don't want to live in your nation if you think that's a national championship game. That is wild. So, I think it is absolutely bonkers to think that Georgia, Texas was a good game. Texas, Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State was a much better game, a much higher quality game than Texas, Georgia. Right, Bill Landis, who is now joining us live from Lucas Oil Stadium.
You hear me okay? Does everything sound okay? Look okay?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, I'm going to have to
Great.
Talk a little bit softer because I'm shouting, but we can hear you well. Yes.
Beauty. I'm not here to talk about how the SEC title game was a national championship. This might have been, though. This might have been.
Yeah.
So the bracket
Bill,
sets up that way.
Let me ask that. I thought we talked about 2 things on Thursday. What if Oregon just comes out and says, hey, we're healthy. By the way, we haven't played our best game yet. We are so clearly the best team in the nation. And we wanted to see Penn State be aggressive and creative and take their best shot. I think maybe we got both of those in the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, I think we did too, because people want to see points at the end of the day, right? You can poke a hole, I guess, like this is the most that anyone's moved the ball in Oregon this year, especially running it, right? So if you want to take that and say that maybe Oregon's defense looked a little suspect today compared to the rest of its games, I guess you could. Well, really, what you really wanted to see was Oregon at maximum capacity offense, which I think you got, and then whether or not Penn State can hang with them, which I think they did. So I think you kind of got the best of both worlds there.
Yeah. So, again, we've talked about it for a month, but Tez Johnson back fully healthy for Oregon, you really saw the pressure that Oregon offense can put on teams and will be putting on teams in the playoff with Jordan James, with now 2 tight ends that they really can rely on, with Tez Johnson, and with like Dylan Gabriel just being locked in. I think it'll be very interesting. We can have a little bit of a Heisman conversation along the way tonight, but I think Dylan Gabriel at times has been underrated this season because, yes, they run a certain style of offense, but there's a lot of quarterbacks that we saw even on conference championship weekend that we don't believe could operate the Oregon offense the way Dylan Gabriel did. When they were on tonight, Landis, they were rolling.
They look very dangerous, and Tez Johnson in particular. It'd be a fun conversation. Who looked the most dangerous on conference championship weekend? Was it Cam Scadaboo at Arizona State, or was it Tez Johnson at Oregon? And I think both guys have a pretty compelling argument, but like Penn State could not cover Tez Johnson. Every time he caught the ball, he looked like he was shot out of a cannon. I was actually pretty shocked that Oregon didn't give him the ball on that second to last drive when they were trying to ice the game away. They just kind of ran it twice and then threw it deep. And Tez Johnson, who had been just dicing up Penn State's defense the entire game, wasn't involved there on a pretty decisive drive, but Oregon lived to tell about it. But yeah, you saw why when Tez Johnson was out for a couple of weeks that maybe Oregon's offense didn't quite look the same, right? Maybe that's why it didn't look so good in Madison, Wisconsin, in a pretty close game where that offense looked kind of clunky. But when you put that guy back in here, and you got Evan Stewart, and you got Trayshawn Holden, and you got Jordan James, and you got Terrence Ferguson, and Kenyon Sadiq, the number 2 tight end, who scored twice tonight. Like, I don't know how you slow it down, man. Like, I honestly think it would take a bad Dylan Gabriel game for you to slow it down, and I don't know that you're going to get that because he's the most poised and experienced quarterback in the country.
So is it reasonable, like, are we officially at the conclusion that anybody in the playoff is going to have to score with Oregon to have a chance, because you are not going to win a 24-21 game against the Ducks right now?
Yeah, I don't see that. Unless there's a defensive line out there that could really control Oregon up front, but Penn State's defensive line's pretty good. Ohio State's defensive line's pretty good, and neither of those teams could do it. So I don't know that an SEC team could do it for 4 quarters either. So you got to bring your offense to the postseason if you're going to play Oregon.
So again, J.D. Pickle is wants to be the first contestant on Honk, Troll, or Moron. But actually, you could actually, and we just don't have to tweet things like this because we're not trying to get on an SEC show. You really could look at Penn State, Oregon, I think, and say, man, like both teams, the way they played offense, but those teams still have defensive playmakers. I don't think those offenses dominated tonight because those defenses are sieves. I think those offenses dominated tonight because it was indoors, it was a fast track, there were playmakers all over the place, and still there are very good defensive players on that field. I think you could look at both Oregon and Penn State and say, man, I think they're going to do some damage in the playoff.
Yeah, you know, if neither defense made a play in this game, then maybe you'd say it was just sort of the inverse of the SEC title game, but both defenses did make play. That pick at the end, that was crazy. From Nico Reed down the sideline, that was one of the more impressive interceptions I've seen. There was another interception in the game from Oregon earlier, and Penn State got some crucial stops. Like, they're just forcing punts and getting off the field, right? So, you know, I'm not going to dismiss what I saw defensively, like out of Texas and Georgia today. Like, that looked pretty formidable, but the other side of the ball did not. And in this game, I thought, you know, the offenses certainly outshined the defenses, but it's not like the defenses weren't doing anything. Like, I thought you could see flashes of defensive playmaking from both teams. And that's honestly what I think the postseason's about. Like, you got to score, and you have to find ways to make a couple defensive splash plays. Like, I maybe it'll be famous last words. I just don't see you like defensing your way to a national championship anymore. You got to be able to put points on the board.
And I agree with that. And I think both. I think offensive playmaker. If we're doing offensive playmakers in the SEC championship game versus the Big Ten championship game, when we're talking about Tez Johnson and Jordan James and Nick Singleton and Ty Warren and guys like that, we would, I think, get pretty far down the list before we would draft anybody from Georgia or Texas if we're playing playmaker draft from the 2 biggest conferences in the title game.
Yeah, I mean, certainly not anyone from Georgia. I don't like Texas has some speed, Texas has some talent, but they didn't put it on display today. So I would take a couple of guys from this game, I think, before I got to either of those teams.
Yeah. So we've been running through this, Bill, but I want to run it through with you while you're here. And we have people who have joined the show who weren't here with the beginning. And this is what everybody's very interested in, is what we think this 12-team bracket is going to be. So let me run through it, and you tell me. I'll say, does this sound right to you? And if you think no, then you lead us a different way, okay? Oregon as the 1 seed.
Yeah.
Georgia as the 2 seed.
Yep.
Boise State as the 3 seed.
Yes.
Arizona State as the 4 seed.
Yes.
Okay. So we think those buys are then pretty locked in. Let me go to the bottom then. SMU or Alabama, whichever team is picked as the 12 seed.
No, I think Clemson's the 12.
You think Clemson's the 12?
Well, I guess if it's
SMU.
If SMU is in, then no. But I think it's going to be Alabama. So then I think Clemson would be the 12 and Alabama would be the 11.
You officially, that is your prediction that Alabama will get in ahead of SMU?
Yeah, it's not one that I agree with, but that's what I think is going to happen.
So then Clemson would be the 12, Alabama the 11. We can talk about that a little more. Indiana the 10?
Yes.
And Tennessee the 9?
Yep.
Do you believe Texas will be the 5?
See, this is where it gets tricky for me. I don't know what they're going to do with Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State.
I've been putting Texas as the 5 and saying I don't know what they're going to do 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, so the thing with Texas is it currently doesn't have a ranked win, right? It has 2 losses. They're both to Georgia. The thing that they're going to do that I feel very confident in is they're going to drop out UNLV, which lost the Mountain West title game, and put Texas A&M, which is currently 26th in the AP poll, back into the top 25 to give Texas a ranked win, which then I think would probably justify putting Texas at 5. But if they don't,
it also
do that,
gives Notre Dame that ranked win too, though, because they both beat Texas A&M.
Sure, yeah, but I don't know that they drop Texas behind Notre Dame. They both beat them in wherever the hell
College
Texas
Station.
A&M was, College Station.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So let's say for argument's sake that they do that. So then, yeah, I probably would say Texas 5, Notre Dame 6, Ohio State 7, Penn State 8.
So we've been having the debate, and there are people on both sides of the Ohio State-Penn State argument. State your case why you, and I think, Bill, at this point, to state like what we think should happen is meaningless. So we're trying to state what we think will happen. Why do you think the committee will put Ohio State ahead of Penn State?
Because once the losses are equal, which they are now, they both have 2 losses, the head-to-head comes back into play. And then Ohio State also has the extra data point of beating a second team that's in the field in Indiana, which Penn State does not have. Penn State's next best win is against Illinois, which is currently ranked, and it's a good win.
Right.
But it's not the same as beating Indiana. So that feels pretty clear-cut to me, because I don't even view that as necessarily punishing a team for losing a conference title game. Like, punishing Penn State would be, I think, giving them a road game. I think if you're still giving Penn State a home game, which it would be happening in this case if they were the 8, then I think it makes sense for them to put Ohio State back at the 7. I guess the only thing that would keep them from doing that, because I think you can argue it either way, is if you keep Penn State at 7 and put Ohio State at 8, then you avoid Ohio State, Indiana for the second time in a month.
Yeah.
So, and like, they're not supposed to do that, but they can kind of do whatever they want.
And you would potentially avoid a Penn State-Oregon Big Ten title game rematch in the quarters. Of course, Ohio State-Oregon would be a rematch as well, but at least it wasn't a couple weeks ago. So, and we just don't know. We won't ever find out if they did massage. They say they're not going to, but we don't know what happens in that room. So they could say, that's just what we thought. But I think those are two points that could make the case for Penn State 7, Ohio State 8, to avoid those 2 things when you could lean either way, I think justifiably.
Do you think there's any chance that both Ohio State and Penn State are ahead of Texas? Or even one of them is?
So the question would be, I mean, to me, Texas was ahead of Penn State, and then they both played in conference championship games and lost close to good teams. So I'm not sure why Penn State would jump Texas. Because they weren't
Penn State
ahead of them
State
before.
won. Penn State has lost to the 2 teams that up until a week ago everyone thought were the 2 best teams in the country. And they were both close games, and Penn State won blow for blow with the undisputed best team in the country right now, whereas all that Texas did was really reaffirm that it's not as good as Georgia, because that's the second time
in overtime.
And like, in overtime, but it wasn't. I really think the committee likes offense, and Texas's offenses look terrible in both the two best games it's played, the two best opponents it's played, which just happens to be Georgia twice. But even against A&M, I think that they scored 17 points against A&M. I'm just saying, I don't think it will happen, but I actually think you could argue it fairly compellingly.
You think because what that is something happened in conference championship weekend that changed your mind about Texas and Penn State and how they relate to each other.
Yeah.
You think that might have happened?
I think possibly, yeah. And then if you run through like best wins or whatever, it's kind of a wash for me, because for Texas it would be presumably a ranked A&M, and for Penn State it'd be Illinois, which would be ranked around the same spot.
So the thing that's very hard about this is, which is why we're just not banging our fists about anything, is you on this show have made a case for Penn State being ahead of Texas, and I've also made a case for Ohio State being ahead of Penn State. Mm-hmm. But we know Ohio State's not going to be the 5. So,
no, but Notre Dame could be, right? Notre Dame 5, Ohio State 6, Penn State 7, Texas 8.
Wow. Greg Sankey would have a conniption if the SEC, if the number 2 team in the country that lost in the SEC championship game in overtime went from 2 to 8.
Yeah, and then they made them play a conference game in the first round.
That is hot. I don't that's think not going to happen.
Yeah,
right.
I don't think it'll happen. Yeah.
So, well, let's do this. So let's do the Landis bracket then real quick, so people can take this back. And it's one of these things that we're having a great debate in the chat. We are also making a show for people to watch later and listen to later. And we don't want to only have the same conversation over and over again, except this is the only thing that matters. But also we want to analyze what we think of the football. But I want people to be able to go to sleep dreaming of the Landis bracket. So let's make it. All right. We did the top 4: Oregon, Georgia, Boise, Arizona State. The official Landis bracket, the 5 is who?
Texas.
Okay. 6.
Notre Dame.
7.
Ohio State.
8.
Penn State.
9.
Tennessee.
10.
Indiana.
11.
Alabama.
Okay.
And
12. Clemson. So then what you are creating is a Texas Clemson 5-12, a Notre Dame Alabama 6-11, an Ohio State Indiana 7-10, and a Penn State Tennessee 8-9. That is your official prediction because you don't believe in massages.
I've actually never had one, so maybe I should try one out. Yeah. No, I don't know. Do I? Yes, but I'm I really just hesitate to kind of predict anything because they can do whatever they want. So,
yeah,
I do. Yeah, I do think that's how they'll do it, because maybe in their minds too they'll think all right, we'll send Clemson to Austin and let's get them out of there. We'll send Indiana to Columbus again. Let's get them out of there, kind of thing. Even if it does create rematches or doesn't create the most compelling first round, people are going to watch it anyway, and I think they want to make sure that the quarterfinals have all the right teams.
Okay. So then what we also would be in the Landis bracket, potentially projecting, if all the favorites win, would be an Oregon-Penn State 1-8, a Georgia-Ohio State 2-7, a Boise State Notre Dame 3-6, and an Arizona State Texas 4-5.
I'm on board with that.
Yeah. I mean, it is wild. There's some wild stuff in there, but it's mainly caused by 3 and 4 seeds being, the idea that you would get a Georgia-Ohio State quarterfinal. Again, that's Ohio State's fault for losing to Michigan versus, a Texas-Arizona State game that it's okay, actually, I think Arizona State might win that game. So anyway, we've given people the brackets, right? The best that we can do. And I don't know if there are shows who are pounding, but I think actually the final word on the bracket is I think it's fine. I think we are having a reasonable discussion. I don't think there are definitive answers to the Bama SMU thing. I don't think there are definitive answers to Texas, Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State. I think there are cases a bunch of different ways, but I don't think we're ruining the sport by having to make a choice. And I do think I'd rather have 13 humans who are ingesting data and taking into account everything that's happened. I would have. group of humans making this decision than a computer model. And there are going to be some hard choices, but I don't think there are any impossible, unfair choices. So I think this first year of the 12-team playoff is going to go okay.
Yeah, there are some difficult choices. I think what matters most to me right now as you try to sort through all of it and what it's going to look like is that Notre Dame, Texas, Penn State, and Ohio State deserve to host, and they will. And I'm good with that. Like shake it out however you want to shake it out. And the Alabama SMU thing is a little murky. I don't know. Let them figure it out. We don't do we care about that? On our show,
No.
Do we care about that too much? I guess I'll say this. I'd love to see Alabama play in the North. I guess I would like to see that. But I'm not going to be super upset no matter which way that breaks because I don't think it's a clear-cut decision. And frankly, they're not our team. So why do I care?
So I will take one more point about the process here from Calvin, who said humans are stupid and then said Doug is stupid for not realizing that humans write their computer models. So we talked about this the other day. We were talking about it in terms of compared to high school sports and the way some state associations have computer models that determine high school football seedings and that kind of thing. Calvin says, have humans make the rules before the season starts, then follow them. I'm actually okay with that. That is not where we are. When the computers are 6 different sets of computers that outside people who are not being paid by the NCAA, and you're not even 1,000% sure what goes into their models, and you're not double checking their models, what goes into that, I think that's crazy. Where we were in the BCS with 2 unreliable polls and 1/3 of it being computer models that we don't really understand, this is much better than that. If you wanted to have a blue ribbon committee appointed by the playoff, appointed by the NCAA, whatever, come up with, here are the things that matter to us for an algorithm, for a computer model. We want to talk about wins and losses, and your record is worth this much. Schedule strength is worth this much. Wins over winning teams with winning records is worth this much. I'm okay with that. So you would have a committee to build a computer model. Okay. Not the old way, though. So I think Calvin and I are actually on the same page here, Bill. But in the meantime, I'm okay with these 13 people, and I don't think we're going to come out of that room with people throwing rocks at them.
No, I don't think so. Well, at least maybe in Tuscaloosa or in Dallas, maybe. But otherwise, I think most reasonable minds understand that that's a little bit of a complicated process with unbalanced schedules and quality wins and strength of schedule and all that. We ran through it when we were previewing the ACC championship, who SMU and Clemson had to play to get there. It's they didn't have to run through the best teams in the league, and Alabama didn't have to play all the best teams in the SEC either. But in the course of going through its season, it did rack up some better wins than SMU did. So I don't know. Yeah. They'll figure it out. I don't really have much issue with the process. Any process you land on is going to be imperfect. I'm fine with this one.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the ball, because I do think there were some similarities between the 2 games that we cared about the most today, which is the Big Ten championship game and the Big 12 championship game. And I thought the similarities, Bill, and I mentioned this briefly earlier, is that both Arizona State and Oregon put you in a blender and score, and you've got to keep up. And you feel like you're drowning if you can't. And that is not a coincidence, because Kenny Dillingham used to be the offensive coordinator at Oregon. Iowa State couldn't do it because they turned the ball over 3 times, and that was it. And you could feel the pressure mounting in that game for that very accomplished, high-powered offense that has, at times, the people to do it. They couldn't do it today because they made mistakes, and the minute you make a mistake, Arizona State pounced. Iowa State turned it over 3 times to open the second half, and Arizona State scored a touchdown off each turnover. It felt like Penn State was maybe getting to that point late in the first half with Oregon, where and instead of drowning, Penn State kept scoring and kept up. And so I do think that is going to be the model for the playoff. And if you have that high-powered kind of offense where I think you can go through in different ways, I think the 6 northern teams that we're going to have in, and that's who we're going to be talking about, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Indiana, and Boise State, I do think all in their own ways have offensive capabilities. And then what I think is really going to help you is a little bit of a squirmy quarterback who can make some plays on the move, escape pressure, do some things running the ball when needed, and defensive playmakers who a couple times a game can show up and do something on 3rd down. can force a holding penalty, can get a sack or a tackle for loss that really changes something. And when we start going through that, who has offensive firepower, a squirmy quarterback, and defensive playmakers, I think we have more teams like that in the North than we do in the South.
I think so too. You're kind of making me want, before the playoff first round gets here, like make me want to go through maybe on a show. Like we did ranking the best skill positions in the North coming into the season. We should probably do that with all the teams that end up in the playoff field.
Yep.
And it's a really interesting conversation at quarterback, because just like even off the top of your head, the teams we assume are in the playoff field, if you want to run through the quarterbacks, just rank them 1 to 12. How far down do you go before you get to a Southern quarterback?
I mean, I don't trust Carson Beck at all. And you and I are watching Quinn Ewers on Saturday and just talking about, man, the footwork is still not there. And man, he threw that pick because it felt like he didn't step into it and he didn't rip that ball. And that there's stuff there, and the good is really good, but there's still a lot of bad that can be really bad. And then listen, Will Howard made 2 devastating turnovers against Michigan and a devastating pick 6 against Penn State. So Will Howard makes mistakes too. But then, like, Quinn Ewers, as much as not going to be squirming and do anything with his legs, that's why they have to bring Arch Manning into the game. I just don't think you trust Carson Beck. I don't know that. I mean, certainly Nico Iamaleava has great potential, but where he is right now, that Tennessee-Alabama game this year was a game of people making mistakes. Jalen Milroe at times looks like a guy shot out of a rocket, but I don't think is consistent. And so, like, you start with Dylan Gabriel, would you not? If you were drafting a quarterback of the 12 expected teams, isn't he the first pick?
He is the first pick, and I think he is the best quarterback in the playoff by a significant margin.
Is Drew Aller the second pick?
I think he can make the case. Like, I know he threw 2 picks tonight, but I also thought he grew up a little bit tonight, right? I thought you saw what we've been waiting to see from him in terms of, like, ripping some throws decisively. He had a couple of key runs. I might put him there second. Like, Sam Levitt at Arizona State actually is. You want to talk about a guy who's pushing that conversation? Like, he's been pretty impressive.
Very squirmy, he's
on a little bit of a heater. And to do what he did today without his top receiving option was pretty impressive. So he's definitely up there. And, like, I think you start having the conversation about North versus South maybe when you get to a Will Howard. Like, Curtis Rourke has played awesome all year, but he did play poorly in the 2 games that he played against quality defenses, like very quality defenses. So that's a point well taken too for anybody who wants to make that. But I guess my point is, like, it's definitely Gabriel. I honestly think you could put Aller second. And then
Riley
it's like a
Leonard,
conversation.
Riley Leonard in his own
Leonard.
way, right? I mean, but, like, he's going to be really tough running the ball and physical at times, and he's so veteran, right? I mean, I think he maybe doesn't have as high of a ceiling, but I think I trust him more than I trust Carson Beck. I think I trust him more than I maybe trust, like, the weird parts of Quinn Ewers.
They're all kind of flawed, with maybe the exception of Dylan Gabriel, right? They all have holes you can poke in their game. But Riley Leonard, I think, has played to his strengths this year, maybe as well as any quarterback in the country, right? So I think that would put him pretty high on this list too. Like, he's not going to wow you with the way he throws the ball, no, but he can run it. He's tough. He has gotten better throwing it, so I think he's very high up in this conversation as well.
And definitely when you think about, like, obviously Georgia's this way, Tennessee is certainly this way, defense first teams, right? And I just think the offensive firepower in the North, whether it's Ashton Genty at Boise State, whether it's Jeremiah Love and Mitchell Evans and Riley Leonard and, like, a decent group of pass catchers at Notre Dame, whether it's Curtis Rourke and the 2-headed backfield for Indiana and some receivers, Elijah Surratt and guys who have really played well this year, whether it's Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Ibuka and Trevion Henderson and Quinshad Junkins and everybody for Ohio State, Nick Singleton and Ty Warren, everybody, Tez Johnson and Dylan Gabriel and Jordan James at Oregon has. Again, like, I just like significantly. And I think we used to live in a time where people thought, oh man, like all the fast guys are in the South, right? Or whatever. SEC speed. What are you kidding me? KOTN speed, baby. KOTN speed.
Yeah. I mean, I want to be fair. Like, when we're talking about, like, I saw that kind of speed on the defenses of Georgia and Texas. They were running and thumping some people in that game. But yeah, I just don't know that I see it. I don't see it come out as consistently on offense, I guess. And I have seen it a lot from northern teams of late, which is just like, people maybe think we're trying to gas them up or whatever. And I guess in some respects we are, but only because I don't think people realize it, right? I'm not trying to say that it's the best collection of offensive playmakers anyone's ever seen in college football, but I think there is probably a perception about teams in the North compared to teams in the South, especially offensively. And I really do think a couple of these teams are kind of bucking that trend, if there's even a trend to begin with.
Can I just make a point, for instance, and again, when you have high-powered offenses, you had very good defenses, of course, like the offenses aren't just going to be able to do whatever they want. But, for instance, in the Georgia-Texas game, Texas on its first 3 drives went 7 plays, 48 yards, 9 plays, 64 yards, 14 plays, 56 yards. It wasn't like Georgia's defense was getting Texas off the field right away, right? They ran 30 plays for 158 yards on their first 3 drives. Georgia ran 15 plays for 69 yards on their first 3 drives. Georgia went punt, field goal on its first 3 drives. Texas went interception on like a sideline route where the Texas receiver didn't really fight for the ball enough and it popped up in the air and Georgia got a pick out of it. Field goal. Texas was moving the ball, kind of doing whatever it wanted to do. The great Georgia defense was not stopping Texas, but Georgia only trailed 6-3. If Georgia does that against Oregon, against Penn State, against Notre Dame, against Ohio State, against Boise State, and maybe against Indiana, if they do that, they're going to be down more than 6-3 because all those northern offenses, I think, are more efficient than Texas a lot of the time and more explosive than Texas. So you could say, we know they have great talent on defense, but it's not like they were just slamming the door. Texas couldn't finish them off, and then that allowed Georgia to hang around in a game where Texas was moving the ball at will but couldn't cash in.
Texas had like 260 yards of offense at the half and only 6 points because Quinn Ewers is not involved in the quarterback run game. I thought Sark kind of got up his own butt a little bit with some of the stuff they were trying to do. And then Quinn also doesn't have the juice on his arm, I think, to make the kind of throws you need to make when you are in the red zone and it's time to finish those drives with touchdowns. So, like, you know, Alabama not ran all over, but kind of just ran through Georgia in the first half of their game too. But they happened to score and just put Georgia in too much of a hole for Georgia to ultimately come back and win that game, right? So whichever team in the North gets matched up with Georgia in that quarterfinal, assuming that does happen, the key will just be scoring early when Georgia's defense seems to be vulnerable. Like they've settled in the second half. They're good on defense. They're very good on defense, but
sure
they don't smother you. It's not 2021. There are openings there. I think you can throw on them actually. And Texas probably should have tried to throw it more. They only rushed for 31 yards, I think, in that game, and maybe shouldn't have run the ball at all. So it's just a point we make all season, right? Like they are good. They are not extraordinary. They are not the Georgia team that we saw a couple years ago and was winning back-to-back national titles, and certainly not the first year. But if you don't take advantage of those opportunities that they do present to you, then they become dangerous. Then they do what they did today because they do. There's a lot of players on that roster that know how to win big games, right? So if you give them the opportunity to do that, they will. And Texas did. But, you know, some of the offenses we've seen in the North maybe won't give them that opportunity.
We certainly want to shout out Army for beating Tulane in the American Athletic Conference Championship game. We want to shout out Ohio for beating Miami in the MAC Championship game. We want to shout out Marshall for beating Louisiana, drubbing Louisiana in a conference championship game. It's just not where we're going to spend a ton of our time here tonight because people are so interested in the brackets and other things. I do want to talk about Iowa State, though, because I was just a little, as much as I was saying, Bill, before you got here, I think they just got blitzed a little bit. There was some momentum stuff to that. And 3 turnovers, fumble, interception, fumble, 2 by Abu Sama on the fumbles, and Rocco Becht hit his lineman in the head with the pass, and it popped up in the air and got intercepted. 3 really bad possessions at a point when if they just would have driven and kept the offense going, they would have had a chance there, but they were never going to tackle Cam Scadaboo. According to PFF, the numbers today, Bill, Iowa State had 21 missed tackles. Arizona State had 6. So this is what Arizona State does to you. And Iowa State had to keep up. And I think they'd only lost 4 fumbles the whole year. I know they'd only turned it over 12 times in 12 games. They turned it over 3 times in 3 possessions, and they were dead. But they were never going to be able to play the defense they needed to. The linebacker injuries really came back to bite them again in the end. This game today, they're playing without, I'd say, 5 of their best 7 linebackers in this game. And even that's with Will McLaughlin being back and playing some snaps, right? But I don't know. You and I both picked Iowa State. As we look at it now, Arizona State was great in not being held back by losing their best receiver. They just ran all over the place, and some receivers stepped up. So maybe we should have realized that, but maybe Iowa State's offense could have kept them in the game, but their injuries on defense and just what Arizona State was doing with Scadaboo, it was not going to happen for them today.
I thought there was a pathway for Iowa State to, like we said, play with 7-8 guys in the box, and they tried, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter, right? It's because Cam Scadaboo, is a pretty special player. Iowa State did a nice job against Kansas State's rushing attack last week, but it had 4 missed tackles in that game. And you said they had 21 in this game. Like, you're not going to beat Arizona State if you're not getting Cam Scadaboo on the ground. And Sam Levitt, too, ran really well. So, when we previewed it, we talked about it. We said, this is a situation of the wrong team being favored clearly. That was not the case.
And actually, the line moved. Iowa State was favored by kickoff. Yeah.
Really?
So everybody was wrong with us.
Everybody was wrong with us. That's good. We all went down together. The thing that surprised me most in that game, it wasn't so much that Iowa State's defense couldn't stop Arizona State, because that has actually been a pretty bad rushing defense all year. I think they were 112th in the country in rushing defense coming into today. It was that they never really got Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll going. Like, they targeted them, but I thought that there was going to be an opportunity that even if it did become a track meet and Iowa State did have to score, it was going to be able to do so, but just by throwing to those 2 NFL receivers, the 2,000-yard receivers, the only team in the country with 2,000-yard receivers. And I actually can't recall off the top of my head how both those guys finished, but it just never really got to the point where it felt like either one was in position to take over that game.
They finished okay, but I think part of it was getting some stuff done late a little bit. Higgins wound up 7 for 115, which is like a pretty decent stat line. Knoll was 5 for 64, and they ran the ball okay. Their 3 running backs and Beck combined 27 carries for 117, which certainly isn't great, but it's not like they got completely shut down. But it was too late. Cam Scadaboo for Arizona State, 18 touches, 208 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So here's the thing, and we have plenty of time to analyze this. We have 2 weeks to analyze this, and we certainly will. We'll talk about it more on Sunday. If you are here with us now, we will be live as soon as the bracket comes out on Sunday, back on this YouTube channel, then putting it up on the podcast feed as quick as we can, and we'll analyze what actually happened rather than what we think is going to happen. But Cam Scadaboo and Ashton Genty are going to be hell for people in this playoff.
Yeah.
And it feels like Boise's going to have a bye, but very intrigued by run defenses, who's going to be able, and just the idea of let's get this desert team up north. We're saying okay, Cam Scadaboo, if it's snowing, just hand him the ball 40 times and Arizona State will be fine. And there are other 20 plays they can have Sam Levitt, the quarterback, run it. So, I'm very curious. I mean, they're not a northern team, but I'm kind of curious to see who Arizona State gets, because they have been a problem with just those 2 guys, and they have some playmakers on defense, and they got after people today.
Yeah, that offensive line for Arizona State, too, I thought was pretty impressive. They owned the line of scrimmage, Arizona State did, on both sides of the ball. That was also mildly surprising. But, no, they look like they're going to be an issue. Anytime you can run the ball like that, and especially involve the quarterback, and to throw it as effectively as they did without the number 1 receiver, who I don't think they'll have at any point in the playoffs. It seems
I think he's done.
Yeah, I think Jordan Tyson's probably out for the year. But they still found other guys, got the tight end involved. So they feel like a pretty complete offense, and their offensive coordinator Marcus Arroyo is pretty good. So I do think whatever you want to call them, tough out, problem, whatever. I don't think they're going to be a team that gets walked over in the playoff.
There's one other thing I thought we both kind of thought this as it was happening early with Oregon and Penn State, especially with the Oregon offense, what they were doing, getting outside, throwing aggressively. Listen, there were some good defensive tackles in that Big Ten championship game, right? Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell are a load for Oregon, and guess what? Penn State has good defensive tackles too, but both teams still scored some points. Were there not some lessons maybe that Ohio State's schemers, Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, could watch the way the Penn State and Oregon offenses operated? Not that we haven't seen Ohio State's offense do that at times. It is just that looked nothing like what Ohio State did offensively against Michigan.
Yeah.
All credit to the Michigan defense, but the things that Oregon was doing, we know, for instance, Oregon and Ohio State play offense differently, but get outside, run some tempo.
Yeah.
Don't slam your head against defensive tackles on first down. It kind of worked.
Oregon played faster tonight, it felt like, than it has for most of the season. It did the same thing against Ohio State, so that seems like maybe that's kind of its MO when it gets into big games. It will push the pace a little bit. Yeah, they got the ball on the edges. I actually think you could maybe combine what both offenses did, because it felt like Oregon was out on the edges the whole time, blocking well in space, using its speed to its advantage, and then Penn State ran the ball well and ran the ball a lot, but it also kind of like gap schemed Oregon to death. Like, it was a lot of pullers out there and getting some movement in, and I think hitting outside rather than trying to hit it up inside every single time. And there were a couple runs where maybe it wasn't blocked up all that well, but the running back kind of ran into a wall, bounced out, and then got loose and got down the field. So, that's clearly what Ohio State needs to be moving forward with its offense. It can't do what it did against Michigan, but I think there was it's not a blueprint for Ohio State. Like, it's a blueprint for everybody, right? It's like, if you have weapons, like, you got to make the other team try to cover the entire field. And I thought both these teams did a nice job of that. Oregon, I think, did it better, but I think maybe the thing I was most impressed with in this game was how Penn State ran the ball.
So Penn State, 292 yards on the ground on 35 carries. They averaged 8.3 yards per carry. Katron Allen and Nick Singleton combined 24 carries for 229 yards. They both ripped off some long yards. Drew Aller did exactly what you want a modern college football quarterback to do. 5 runs for 54 yards from really cool key scrambles. They worked in Bo Prabula a little bit. And for instance, we talked about, when Penn State, this was such a better performance. There are just things here to learn. This was such a better performance by Penn State than the loss to Ohio State. Because in that loss, we talked about Penn State was upside down. Their leading rusher was their tight end. Their leading pass catcher was their running back. In this game, of course, they did the Ty Warren wrinkles, but Ty Warren, 7 catches for 84 yards, was their leading pass catcher, and their 2 running backs both went over 100 yards. That's what you're supposed to do. Penn State actually outgained Oregon 518 yards to 466. 75 plays for Oregon, 74 plays for Penn State. So that's getting up and, like, again, tempo on both sides, not being afraid to go fast. God, they were good. 7.0 yards per play for Penn State, 6.2 for Oregon, and then Oregon exactly what they want to be. 11 catches for 181 on 12 targets for Tez Johnson. Feed your guys. The 2 best pass catchers in this game both had 12 targets. Tez Johnson and Ty Warren. Feed your guys. Jordan James, 20 carries, 87 yards. Noah Whittington, who is a great number 2 back, 15 carries, 82 yards. I'll tell you what, man. And then Aller threw 2 picks, but I mean, one was like the deep shot down the sideline late. It was a lot of really good offense that I think is going to travel. I don't think this was a one-off. I think this is what to expect from these 2 teams, and it should be what people expect from Ohio State if Ohio State's going to do anything. There is no reason that Ohio State's offense doesn't look like this in the playoff. Now, we acknowledge that playing outdoors in Columbus, South Bend, and State College is going to be different than playing indoors in Indy. But there might not be 2 feet of snow on the ground, and there might not be 40-mile-per-hour winds. And so if the opportunity is there to throw for these teams, you've got to get the ball to your best pass receivers, and your biggest playmakers. And just such a credit to Oregon and Penn State for doing that tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds simple, but that's what you want to do. And when the offenses were doing that, what it came down to in the end here was Dylan Gabriel just being, I think, maybe slightly more poised than Drew Aller was. Like, Dylan Gabriel didn't make the 2 mistakes that Drew Aller made. And the first pick was like a really bad, just like behind, wasn't a bad decision to throw it, I thought, just like a bad ball, just kind of threw it behind the receiver. The second one is like, I don't mind taking a shot, but they were running the ball so well. There was still a lot of time left. I might have maybe not pushed the pace there, because even if you score there, Oregon's getting the ball back with a ton of time left to go down and win the game, right? I thought that Penn State maybe could have managed that a little better, but the guy made an incredible interception too, so it wasn't like Drew Aller made a bad throw there either. So both quarterbacks played well. Dylan Gabriel was a little better, while the offenses were both humming, and Dylan Gabriel being a little better, I think, was the difference. So I guess there's maybe a lesson there too, like quarterback poise. It doesn't have to be like extraordinary quarterback playmaking, although Dylan Gabriel did make a couple pretty nice plays under pressure and on key downs in this game. It's about poise and handling the moment and not making mistakes, and kind of letting the guys who are dangerous with the ball in their hands doing the legwork. And that's what both teams tried to do, and I thought did fairly effectively tonight.
So again, this was a statement I made off the top, Bill. Oregon is definitively the best team in the country and clearly the favorite to win the national championship. I don't know who would argue with that right now.
Yeah.
But we have seen in various forums 3 other Northern playoff teams, Boise State, Ohio State, and Penn State, hang with Oregon.
Mhm.
And I think that is a very good sign of Northern strength. And I think when you talk about those games, certainly Oregon was a different team having offensive line issues in week 2 when Boise only lost to them by a point. But I think most of the other stuff here, right, is like Oregon was clicking when Ohio State hung with them out in Autzen, right? And this was healthy, good Oregon, and Penn State hung with them today. I think we've seen when the best teams in the North have played each other, I think we've seen pretty high-level games. I don't think we have seen that in the South consistently. And I think all these teams, I think Penn State, for instance, off tonight should be heading into the playoff with a ton of confidence.
I think so too, because they wanted to be sure their offense could do what it did tonight, right? And so there have been 3 teams that have scored 30 points in Oregon this year. It was Boise, Ohio State, and Penn State. The other 10 games, Oregon's given up like 120 points or something like that. It's fewer than 2 touchdowns a game. So it's a really good defense, and those offenses found a way to move it and score against Oregon. And if you were to stack those 3 and said, which of these 3 do you think is least likely to do that, you would have said Penn State before today. And Penn State showed something, I thought. So they should feel confident. Like, no silver linings in a loss, but you and I talked about, like, the thing that Penn State had to do was come out and set a tone for what it wanted to be in the postseason. And I think it did that, even though it came up a little bit short.
I'll just go back to the part where this is what really impressed me about Penn State. Penn State goes field goal, touchdown, punt on its first 3 possessions, while Oregon goes touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. Oregon comes out 9 for 84, 10 for 75, 7 for 60 are their first 3 drives of the games, all for touchdowns. So already Penn State's teetering. They're down 21-10 at that point. The 4th possession, then they finally force an Oregon punt, but then they throw the pick. And then Oregon scores on the short field, right? So now it is 28-10. And you would think, like, absolutely that's teetering. Now you're in Arizona State, Iowa State territory, are you not, where you're about to get your doors blown off? And instead, down 28-10, Penn State goes on an 8-play, 75-yard touchdown drive. They force a 3 and out and a punt from Oregon, and then go 10 plays, 64 yards touchdown drive to make it a game again. That is a new Penn State to me. That is a playoff-ready Penn State. That is exactly what we were talking about, of go there, take your shot, and test drive a playoff run. And like that showed that to me. And then we get it. In the second half, Oregon didn't let up. They didn't let up. But Penn State still hung, and it wasn't quite enough. But I thought I was ready for Penn State to go away there, and they didn't.
So they did not. And at that juncture, when it was 28-10, when Penn State kind of staged that kind of late first half rally, we were sitting down the end of the press box near some Penn State beat writers. I was talking to some of them. They're like, that's the best the offense has looked all year. Really? And then I was asking some people at halftime, I was like, is this the best that Nick Singleton has played since his freshman year? And they said, oh yeah, it might be the best he's ever played. Like, he just looked really explosive, right? So that's just something we haven't seen from Penn State. And then in the second half, like, it was right there. They're like ready to really kind of not take the game back over, but just kind of really bring it back to square. They had a pretty interesting play design where they put one of their offensive linemen like out in the slot, had a 5-man front, but Tyler Warren was on the end of the line of scrimmage, so he was eligible and he was wide open, and Drew Aller missed him, and that was going to be a touchdown, and then I think they missed the field goal, right? So like that was a crucial juncture in that game. But maybe take that drive away and the 2 interception drives, and otherwise I think you'd have to say this is the best that Penn State's offense has played this year.
So we can conclude with this, and we would certainly invite anybody here to tell a friend and be ready to join us after the bracket comes out on Sunday. So we know that if you're here after midnight, after 1 a.m. in the East, that you're going to be watching and be very interested when the bracket comes out. We're going to be breaking all of this down even more. But here's where I think I stand right now, Bill. I think Oregon is the favorite, and I think Penn State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State, to me, are very much in the category of talented enough, with quarterbacks who can make enough plays, with enough defensive playmakers, and with enough of a variety of offensive firepower that they can absolutely take their shot. Then I would say Indiana is more of an efficient offense than a high firepower offense. We have seen what they did. They didn't look the same against the best defenses, but man, I'm not going to like give up on Coach Siggs. Go take your shot, right? And then I don't have a handle on Boise, but Ashton Genty might be the best player in the playoff. So, okay, that feels like something that could happen. And those are our 6 Northern teams. Let's ride.
Yeah, I think they all have a reason to be excited. Like Boise, I think is actually pretty good up on the lines. Like for a G5 team, their offensive line is healthy, as we said going into the Mountain West Championship. The defensive line gets after you a little bit. Genty's awesome, and like Oregon or Indiana is going to have to go on the road and play a really good defense. And the 2 really good defenses it's played, we know how that's gone. So like it's going to be a little bit of an uphill climb for them, but they've had some time to regroup. They've had some time to learn some lessons from those games. They're going to play, I think, with a little bit of an edge in those games, and they're going to be playing with house money, and they're going to be able to kind of let it fly and see what happens. So I think they could take a better swing at whatever this playoff matchup is than we saw them take against Ohio State and Michigan the first time.
The last thing we'll end with is a little bit of a tiny Heisman conversation here, because you and I are both Heisman voters and our ballots are due Monday, and we certainly are not the kind of people who are going to vote before conference championship game weekend. By the way, there's a lot of complaining about people voting early before conference championship game weekend. The Heisman Trust could end that tomorrow by not sending out the ballots until midnight on Saturday when the games are over. Everybody's thinking about their Heisman ballot. We've been voting for years. It takes you 5 minutes to actually vote. It is not a difficult process. It is very secure. All credit to them. It's very simple, but also secure. We also vote for you already voted, but I was like voting for other awards tonight, and it's on Survey Monkey, which is like Survey Monkey is like, I don't like, you could do a Survey Monkey of like, do you like radishes or do you like artichokes? It's like you do that on Survey Monkey, not like deciding who the best quarterback in the country is. But anyway, it's what they do. The Heisman is much better than that. Why do they send them out early, Bill? There's no reason to. I think it's a vestige of like they used to send them out early when people were like writing their names on a piece of paper and mailing it back. It's like, well, we got it.
Right. Yeah.
There's no mailing. It's digital. It takes 5 minutes to do, and giving people 24 or 36 hours to vote is more than enough. It should be from midnight Saturday into Sunday, and I think the ballots are due at 5 p.m. on Monday. It's insane to me because people are complaining, why do you vote early? And it's just like, don't let them vote early.
Well, I think the part of the issue is how many voters there are, right? And still I think they're better about making sure those voters actually cover college football, but there are definitely some stragglers still who don't cover college football. Do you trust you're going to get all 900 or whatever it is ballots back in 36 hours? It's probably the thought process. So they send them out. I think we got them on Monday, right? They came out. So
I would argue I would rather not have a ballot than a ballot sent in before conference championship game weekend. I think they say that maybe 10% of people vote before conference championship game weekend. If the end result is 10% of people don't vote, I think that's a better outcome.
So do I. Yeah. I'd be fine with 100 fewer Heisman voters. That's fine with me.
Yeah. So I don't know why they do it, but you and I were talking about our vote. We're not going to reveal it, but conference championship weekend mattered to us. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say. Yeah. I'm not 100% clear on the order or all the spots yet. Yeah.
Yeah. And certainly what Cam Scatterbo did mattered to us. We had left the door open for a Tyler Warren performance that was through the roof to matter to us. He played very well. I don't think it was to that level necessarily. Dylan Gabriel was the point guard of the best team in the country, and that really matters. And again, I think we can underrate Dylan Gabriel, but then you look at other quarterbacks and say, well, they wouldn't do that. I think he didn't put up 450 passing yards, but I think he was Dylan Gabriel. He was Dylan Gabriel. In the biggest moment, he was the guy he's been, which is the leader of the best team. I think that's a very compelling case. But the hard thing is you only get 3 spots to vote, and it feels like most people in the country know who 2 of those spots are going to. So now who all of us pick as the third guy on the ballot, whether you put him third, whether you put him second, whatever, is really going to matter, because I think people understand this, but there are 4 people. It's now always 4 finalists in New York, but each individual voter only gets to vote for 3.
Yeah, that's actually, and it's going to be pretty tough, I think, because I do. Yeah. Well, for me, it's kind of tough between like 2 guys. I think for other voters, maybe it's going to be tough between 3 guys. Who the South coalesces around will be interesting. Is that the right word? Coalesce? Coalition?
It
coalesce? Is. Yeah. Okay. So we'll see how that breaks out. But yeah, it's not like for as obvious, I think, at times as people have made this Heisman conversation seem, and there definitely are two guys who are going to be there, in Ashton Jeanty and Travis Hunter. Like, I actually don't think we come out of conference championship weekend with much clarity on who number one should be.
One guy played on conference championship weekend and one did. And it's not Travis Hunter's fault that he didn't play. His team tied for first. They just didn't win the tiebreaker. It's not like they were in 9th place. Colorado easily could have been playing.
Have you looked at the
on
odds?
Saturday, and they weren't. I mean, have they moved from what they were a couple days ago when Travis Hunter was minus 5,000 and Ashton Jeanty was 13-1? Travis Hunter is now minus 2,500, and Ashton Jeanty is 10-1.
Okay.
So there's movement. So Travis Hunter, whatever. You had to bet $5,000 to win $100. Now you only have to bet $2,500 to win $100. And Jeanty from 13-1 to 10-1 is like, I don't know. Dylan Gabriel 300-1, Shadur Sanders 400-1. I mean, those are just like, because you can't bet on like who's going to make it to New York. Yeah. So it's only going to be Jeanty or Hunter. So all those bets are throwing it away. So it's like, why isn't Cam Scatterbo in those odds? Because he's not going to win. But I think he might have a better chance to get to New York. So I'm still thinking about it as we sit here, as we are in early in the morning on Sunday. Because you should think about it a lot. And I do think some guys like Dylan Gabriel did what he needed to do. Cam Scatterbo did what he needed to do. Ashton Jeanty did what he needed to do. And when you do that in the biggest spots for really good teams, that really matters.
It does. Yeah, I'm still thinking about it too. And I'll keep thinking about it throughout the day on Sunday and send it in sometime on Monday.
Okay, so between now and when people see us next, which will be in about 11 hours and 30 minutes maybe, you are going to leave Lucas Oil Stadium.
Yes.
Come back to the hotel, sleep, wake up, eat like a muffin. Maybe eat like a muffin.
We're going to go to Jack in the Box. We're going to go to Jack in the Box on the way out.
Look at you with the plan. That's why you're the chief content officer. Yeah. You're the chief content officer / chief breakfast officer. They've probably done that for a commercial. Our chief breakfast officer, my God, if someone had a commercial that had a chief breakfast officer, I would go to that place all the time.
Urban Meyer was the head breakfast coach for like a day.
He was.
Remember? Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember that. I think, but I would rely on you more as the chief breakfast officer. So I might even let you order for me tomorrow. And then we're going to drive back from Indianapolis, Indiana to Columbus, Ohio, so that we can be in our homes when the bracket is announced, so we can do a show not in a hotel or a stadium.
That is the plan.
Okay. So we are so grateful that you guys are with us tonight live here on YouTube. We are grateful if you are listening back on podcast apps. We're grateful if you're listening back on YouTube, and we would love to see you on Sunday. And then we got 2 weeks of previews, baby. Like, we're not going to ignore everybody else in the North. We're going to talk about bowls. We're going to talk about transfer portal stuff. We're going to talk about head coaching changes. Tim Albin, who did a great job with Ohio University this year, is going to be the new head coach at Charlotte, which means, of course, he's dead to us. But anyway, good luck to that guy. I almost made it. Without my cord falling out again.
But we got you back.
Yeah,
we had you back.
Sorry.
Maurice,
I'll get into it. So like Phil sometimes asks, like, how come if the guy goes to the South, like he's dead to you? Do you not understand? No. So congratulations to all the winners on conference championship weekend. Congratulations to all the competitors. I think it was college football. And we're really glad that you guys joined us for a chunk of it. We will see you after the bracket comes out. Like, when you see the full bracket out, all 12 teams are in and seated. It's like, when's the show going to start? It's going to start 14 seconds after that. So, like, we'll see you then. So maybe, I don't know, Bill, maybe there's people here who just really want to hear what Paul Feinbaum has to say about the bracket. If that's the case, you're more than welcome to listen to something else. Yeah. But if you want an interesting, informative discussion from a Northern point of view, you know where to find us.
Yeah, because when the bracket comes out, we're going to talk about like what's going to happen, not what should have happened with the bracket, right?
Yeah, because like we're not going to be all wound up because like we're not going to have a 79-minute SMU Alabama discussion. We're just going to talk about the Southern teams coming up here to freeze. Yeah. So. We'll certainly discuss the things we discussed tonight, Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State. Hey, what order did they put them, whatever. But then we'll get on to ball. because we kind of like
that's
ball.
right.
So,
We do.
All right. Thanks to our producer, Mike Yarostowski, as always, for making us look good and sound good. Thanks to you guys for being here. Without you, we would be strange men shouting into microphones for no reason. From Lucas Oil Stadium, he is Bill Landis. From the comfort of my hotel room, I am Doug Lesmerises, and that was KOTN Late Night on Kings of the North.